It's time for OWC Radio. Tech Talk with Creatives. Conversations with host Cirina Catania. Technology and creativity. Gotta love it.
I have on the line Larry O'Connor. He is the CEO and founder of one of my favorite companies, Otherworld Computing. And I say that for many reasons, not just because we are so grateful to them for sponsoring the OWC Radio, but because they are so involved on many levels in the tech world, in the creative world, and anyone who uses, produces, works with media and needs technology to back them up. So Larry, thank you from all of us, and thanks for taking the time to do this. I have a ton of questions for you today.
Cool, yeah, well, this is always fun. So I enjoy being here. This is, again, it's a pleasure.
So I know you've been swamped, and you have not had a chance to even see Tim Cook's address to the Stanford Commencement, but I wanted to just give you a few quotes and see if they resonate with you and get your reactions to them, because he was talking about builders. And, you know, when I think of Tim Cook and the folks at Apple and companies like that, I always think about you and OWC, because what you are doing is for the future. It's for the present too, but it's also for the future, and you're giving back so much. So it says here, he talks about, and a lot of the press have been covering the fact that he talked about the crisis and chaos. But what he did say, he says, the blind faith has been shaken a bit. He says here, crisis has tempered optimism. Consequences have challenged idealism, and reality has shaken blind faith. But then he goes on to say, for good reasons. Big dreams live here, as do the genius and passion to make them real. In an age of cynicism, this place still believes that the human capacity to solve problems is boundless. And I wanted to get your reaction to that.
No, I love it 100%. I mean, progress doesn't come without consequence, and at every step forward, there's new challenges that have to be solved that progress ultimately leads to. But I'm the same page with 100%. I know they're referring to a lot of the things that are going on with looking at possible regulation of different tech companies that have perhaps forgotten their original mission that started out and are still based in Silicon Valley. But ultimately, there's a lot of good there, and it's like every generation has got to deal with the consequences of and perhaps the abuse of what's good with the temptation of misusing how to say that next great leap.
Yeah, he goes on to say...
Yeah, brilliant words.
Yeah, I think the speech, I believe, is going to go into history as being one of the best of our generations, to be honest with you. He brought up so many issues, but he did them so eloquently, and as such a gentleman, I appreciated it. He talks about all the mental effort that it takes to build something. He said, what's true then is true now. Don't waste your time living someone else's life. Don't try to emulate the people who came before you to the exclusion of everything else, contorting into a shape that doesn't fit. It takes too much mental effort that should be dedicated to creating and building. You'll waste precious time trying to rewire your every thought, and in the meantime, you won't be fooling anybody. Graduates, the fact is, when your time comes, and it will, you'll never be ready. And then he goes on in the end to say, and always remember, you can't take it with you. You're going to have to pass it on. I was very moved by that. What do you think?
You really can't argue with those words. I mean, they're timeless and definitely respective of reality, versus anything you want to try to hide behind.
Absolutely. And I thought about you immediately, Larry, because my experience with you and with the company over the last many years has been that you always live in the present for the people that have your products. You have great customer service, and I don't want to sound like an advertisement for OWC. That's not why I'm saying this. I'm saying this because there are people like Tim Cook and people like you and others in the tech community who spend their whole lives building products for other people. And you always talk about giving back. Talk about OWC and giving back.
It's interesting. I go outside of OWC and talk to folks and kind of explain some of the things that we do. And some people are astonished, impressed at that. And really, you give from the heart. I mean, it's not something. It's almost just a common sense ingrained thing. I mean, you do what you can, where you can, how you can, and some of the giving back is donations, different things we believe in, areas that we have the ability, the understanding, to help, whether it's our technology, experience, whatever it may be. I mean, you can give back in all sorts of different ways. Other areas, quite frankly, are in products that we create. I mean, there's stuff we support out there that we support not because it's, not because anybody else really would even want to support in terms of, the segment that it was there for, but because it makes a difference to people who need it, people that matter, and it has a benefit. It could be environmental, it could be any number of different things, but it makes a difference for a group that we believe still needs that difference made. And we like the cause, but it's just fundamental to who we are, how we go. I mean, maximizing all those resources, giving people the best opportunities to make the biggest difference they can in the world. We don't make solar panels or wind turbines, but that technology enabled us to be less impactful, to be able to do more with and reduce our own footprint in the world. We extend the life of these computers because these systems should last forever. They can last for not quite forever, but for a very long time. And it's really cool to keep them in people's hands where they can be productively doing something versus really the non-friendly and certainly not efficient option of ending up disassembled or worse, in a landfill.
I love your DIY videos about how to upgrade your computers. I've done it before based on what I've learned from OWC. I had an old laptop that lasted for years and years, and it's still going. It's a 2011, and I put some new drives in it with your videos, with the help of your videos, and now I'm teaching other people how to do it. It was great. But you're right. Those things can last a lot longer than, planned obsolescence of the 50s doesn't always have to come true, does it?
No, and it shouldn't. And, I had some conversations with some people and kind of had I started looking at things a little bit differently, but it's interesting. You look at prior generations. I mean, and I talk to people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and some folks, not everybody, but there's a large percentage of the population that, you go back, 30, 40, 50 years, certainly 30 or 40 or 20 or 30 years. We have great abundance today. Our biggest issue with abundance is, using it correctly. But compared to, when the population was half the size it is today, a third the size it is today, the abundance then, the resources were endless. And if you walk into the grocery store today, in the commercial world with all the, the advertisements and marketing and lobbies and everything else going on, that, this consumer society, which, again, I'm not by any means saying that itself is fundamentally wrong, but the way it's marketed, there's still the illusion that, there's an endless supply of everything, that the resources that make this stuff possible, whether it be fresh water, energy, the impact to air quality, everything else that we depend on, the fisheries, you name it, are boundless. And, that's not quite the case. But, a lot of folks that are in denial of, what, we're facing going forward, they come from a time when there really were boundless resources. Today, we still have plenty of abundance, but if we don't manage it right, if we don't pay attention and take the steps today to make sure those resources are used efficiently, that we do maximize what we have, tomorrow becomes a lot more difficult. But it is real hard getting through the folks that grew up in a day when you didn't have to think about any of this stuff. And still, from their point of view, you go to the grocery store, these things that people talk about, being threats to the system. Well, why are they still available in the store? Why can I still walk in and buy them? Like I've always bought them if they're really at risk or creating risk, and it's interesting. But I give it a lot of. You look at the class that Tim Cook just preached. The current generations get it. It's just and again, I honestly not too concerned for the future because folks like yourself, folks like folks in general, in the younger generations, I do think they're more cognizant that this ship is turning very, very quickly. We just need to make sure that the airtime's given to those that are actually, building the future, and not those that, quite frankly, at this point are already past that point and are no longer really. Not to say they're not contributing is not the right word, but no longer building for tomorrow. They've built, and they deserve credit for everything that they built. And now it's the next generations that will get things hopefully in alignment for the future to come. But that's every generation has its challenge, and it's up to every generation to surpass it. We have great new technologies, great new advancements, and bottom line is like everything else, making sure that is applied in the best way possible. The best things in the world can obviously be used for ultimately get turned into things that they weren't originally intended for. But we're still better off having, most of those advancements. I kind of ramble on and switch around here.
I have a lot of faith in not just the new generations, but the way that the baby boomers and that generation have been evolving and the things that you've done for all of these generations. I really do think that we're very lucky right now to have the things that we have. And I look around at the productions that I'm involved in and what I have that I need to use on a tech side in order to tell my stories. And I see a marriage there. I mean, I think we're all in the same tribe. And I look around when we go to events like NAB or IBC or NAM, and people gather together because they care about the stories that they're telling. But they need companies like the hardware companies, the software companies, the tech creators. They need that. So it's kind of exciting. But I know that you were really excited about the new MacPro because of quite a few reasons, and I want to make sure because you've got some new products too. So I don't even know what to talk about first. What do you want to talk about first? Your reaction to the new MacPro?
I'd love to talk about Apple's new hardware.
Do it.
I'll tell you the Mac Mini, I tell you, when Apple introduced the new Mac Mini, late last year, it provided that glimmer of hope for the future. A new hope was born. They took away they neutered the Mac Mini in 2014, and it really, they had really two directions to go with that, and they could have turned it into basically an Apple TV type device with even less functionality, or they could give us some horsepower and give people back a little bit of control over how they configure and what they can do today and still have some flexibility for the future. And Apple went in a great direction on that machine. And that machine, I look at something like our Mini Stack, which we designed just for the Mac Mini. It's a product that's been around for about a decade, actually over a decade now, because we had it for the previous Mac Mini design as well. And, the Mini Stack, we had from a time perspective, we had over a year's supply of the product. It really slowed down after Apple, from all practical purposes, abandoned the Mac Mini. Mm-hmm. And when the new one came out, all of a sudden that over a year's supply was gone in less than 2 months. We actually, got behind the curve on it because there was all of a sudden here was a machine that people were buying, and of course they needed storage for it. But the main point was, I don't think that previous Mini was selling all that great. Certainly not to the broad base that the previous Mini appealed to. And Apple brought a good part of that back with a machine that's incredibly powerful, that can even be, with external devices, can even be brought up to compete with an iMac Pro, which really, really impressive. But getting to the great new Mac Pro, that certainly, Apple was definitely listening when they went the direction they did in the Mac Mini, and Apple certainly, for the most part, lived up to high expectations, with what that new Mac Pro was going to deliver, when they introduced it at WWDC. It was either going to be a great machine or it was going to be something that closed the door in the pro world if it didn't add up. And, it's the price point there's a little sticker shock there, that's for sure. But, all things considered, the new Mac Pro is...
What is it, starting at about $5,600, something like that? For a pro machine, I think that's competitive, don't you, when you compare it to other platforms, or not?
Well, I don't disagree with comparing it to other platforms. There's certainly truth in that. The only issue that Apple kind of created for themselves, and we'll see how that plays out, is because we didn't have a real pro machine in terms of what the pros needed for the last few years. They created this. It's not just, people aren't just comparing it to other, similar models. They're comparing it to the horsepower they can build in, Hackintosh. Mm-hmm. And
or
you have
the
people
dream
that switch
machines.
To the PC space or the dream machines. You've switched. You're competing with a world that now is gotten used to. They aren't necessarily buying a Dell. They may be buying something that they put together, or some other. There's a zillion different companies that put decent server grade machines together on the PC side. So all in all, I'm looking forward to. To seeing that machine come out. It's one thing that Apple delivers is stability and overall integration and reliability that nobody else matches yet today. And time is irreplaceable. Again, I'm not saying that the price isn't fair for the machine, but perhaps they could have, I don't know, I'm not going to get into the super cheese grater design. I mean, the old one, named the cheese grater, okay, had the grates and all. This one looks like a cheese grater. I mean, this one you could probably actually grate cheese with. The other one, not quite so much. This one, I think you could actually take to that level, and it's interesting. People are either love the design or hate the design. I'm relatively neutral on this stuff because I want I'm big on the function.
Yeah, I agree.
A Pro machine, I mean, it's.
I care more about what's inside. I can, let them worry about the design. I'm more worried about what's inside. There's so much. Can you tell people exactly what Xeon processors are? What is it? How is it different?
The Xeon processor does, how do I say? I mean, compared to the standard, I mean, at the end of the day, for raw horsepower, depending on what you're doing, there's not. In some cases, there's not a lot of difference, or you can even have slightly less, performance. But there's more. How do I say? I guess you could say there's more towing power for more complex tasks that are, multi-threaded, and how to say, and take advantage of parallel processes. The Xeon processor is more robust, more reliable, has more air handling capability, and the bottom line is less likely to be affected by, you have things that limit where, effectively heat's not going to be something that's going to bring that processor down. I mean, it's a higher grade processor. I mean, it's to a certain degree, and this is not a direct analogy. Don't come out saying that, because Thunderbolt's not enterprise, but it's like comparing Thunderbolt to USB. USB is great for plenty of things, and USB and Thunderbolt for a lot of things perform very similar in terms of raw performance, but Thunderbolt is head and shoulders above USB when it comes to overall reliability, stability, and how to say user experience. The consistency of what you're going to get out of it. And then at enterprise level, at application level, the amount of horsepower and torque, and I'll call it towing power. Xeon is that's a server grade, 24/7 mission critical level processor, versus a consumer prosumer processor, which the standard i7s, i9s are.
So,
but that doesn't mean, again, that doesn't mean that they're any less capable. It just means in terms of a heavy ongoing workflow, certainly things that take more, have more threads, more things. You just end up. They're cooler under pressure, I guess would be one way to put it.
Well, I'm sitting here on a desk with an iMac and a big 27-inch monitor, and it feels like the heat is on. So I think about the heat that Xeon might generate, and if it's better with heat, that's a good thing, right? Or am I talking about something completely different? I'm trying to understand what's under the hood here. Well,
that's a whole other Apple type of thing. The heat that the iMac radiates is mainly because of the design of the iMac and Apple's insistence on dead quiet, which is really a good thing. But in the case of the iMac, just by means of its design, you end up with heat buildup. The processor can take it, but you end up with you feel that heat venting because the temperature rises to a higher temperature than would be otherwise if there is little bit different cooling going on. The MacPro is designed to definitely will have superior cooling, versus a iMac. Ultimately, if you're in a room, both contribute the same heat, but the heat that is right in front of you at the ventilation point, will be lower. Talking about all sorts of different things, but the new MacPro is high level production class. That whereas you'll be pushing the processor in a desktop or an iMac, that kind of system, to its maxes. Apple already demonstrated with some of the things they showed up on stage, with that Xeon processor in that platform. They won't even be breaking a sweat. It'll have more to give, versus being pushed to the red line.
I love the fact that it can have up to 1.5 terabytes of RAM, which it's going to need if it's running all of those threads, right?
The short answer is yes. There will definitely be ways to take advantage of that memory, which is pretty darn cool. We're looking forward to being able to load that sucker up with OWC memory. We're also really excited about having PCI slots, those expansion bays, and we've already got a significant number of product designs and solutions that should be hopefully, if all goes the way it's going right now, they'll be ready when that machine's ready.
That's awesome. So
we have a machine that we can expand now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think we all have wanted expandable Macs for a long time. I'm really excited about it. These last ones, I've talked to you a couple of times and heard the disappointment in your voice when we were talking about the fact that some of these products couldn't be expanded. Now we've got something that can be. I think everybody's saving up their pennies for these machines, and certainly the enterprise, the corporations that work in the gaming industry, for example, are going to be jumping all over this thing. Because I don't know that there's anything comparable out there, right?
None. I mean, from a hardware level, there really isn't, and from just a total, reliability, just from the whole package, what you get on the Apple platform. When you put the hardware and the software together, Apple, honestly, today still can't be beat. So no, those machines they will, again, their price tag, it is what it is. But all things being said, they'll pay for themselves.
Yeah. Talk to me about what OWC is doing to handle the demand on 8K, 1000K. I mean, it's getting a little ridiculous. I was looking at the Mercury Helios, the eGPU that you have, and wondering if you would talk to us again about that and tell us if there's anything developed in that area since we spoke last.
And I don't remember if we covered it or not, but multi-GPU capability is being brought into the equation for different software apps. Adobe for their Creative Suite and Premiere have brought that into action, and that means things that with a single GPU you might have taken just to make up a number and not remaking it up. I think relatively similar to the real world. Maybe it took 90 seconds. Even with a new modern single GPU, but when you can use both GPUs and split that load. It's not even splitting the load. It's gaining efficiencies from that multi GPU. Something that took 90 seconds can be knocked down to I think it was somewhere between 18 and 24 seconds. Huge improvement in benefit. And where we don't have slots in all these other machines, it is really slick that we can connect. You can when something changes, a new codec comes out, new advancement in GPUs, it comes into play, that you can simply plug in our Helios. Actually, that's the thing, not just plug in it, every time a new one comes out. You can get our Helios today, put in that right GPU into the Helios today, and a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, everything else is cranking good, but something's changed in the world in terms of your video requirements, GPU requirements. Pull the card out of the Helios that's in there now, put a brand new GPU in, and now you're up to date with GPUs. Because if we had upgradable GPUs in all these systems for the last 5-6 years, I think that there'd be a lot less. But you'd probably have substantially fewer system sales, just on the basis that more than anything else, GPU demands have changed. Less so, I should say, a lot more so than the processor. So now we got the MacPro, and with slots, so there won't be the limitation of what it came with is it inside, and that's a whole different level. But even for iMac Pro and Mac Mini, MacBook Pros, all these systems, they're no longer obsolete just because the GPU is no longer able to meet what today's demands are. The processor's great, and it's just a new codec or need a faster GPU. Let's swap the GPU, or add a Helios if you haven't already done so. The only thing I'm still hoping Apple gets going around is supporting the NVIDIA in addition to AMD. I mean, that would be a huge game changer for a lot of folks. That's one of the biggest feedbacks we get, bringing actually having proper NVIDIA support back on the Mac.
And it's interesting. It's not a vanity thing with us. Speed is not. It's not about pushing on the pedal and breaking the speed limit. It's because we have work to do, and time is money, and efficiency is money, and we are. All of us, from the largest companies on down to the one-person shop working alone in an apartment, we are all against the wall with budgeting and with time constraints and with crew constraints. And so anything that makes us more efficient, and hardware you can trust, that's the other thing, because it's just nerve-wracking. I had a long conversation today with a person running a media department at a university, and they had gotten some equipment from a company that will remain nameless, brand new drives populating everything, and the drives started to go before they even started loading media on them. That's crazy. So, you're talking speed, you're talking also security, with these. You didn't mention it, but I believe that there's some security issues that you've handled with some of this, or are you just cognizant of it? How's all that working with security?
All of our products, in terms of talking about encryption security?
Yeah.
Yes, that's... We certainly are cognizant of it, and our products support it. And even the new soft RAID will enable full encryption capability. So definitely all over that. I still argue that how to say the best security is controlling your data, controlling access to your data, as opposed to too heavy of encryption. Because the problem with encryption, especially for kids, it happens all the time. Even with basic encryption, they put little lock codes on their devices, and obviously when they put that device down for 6 months. And somebody hasn't kept track of what the key is, and suddenly whatever priceless data was being protected by that encryption is now, how do I say, it's locked away forever. But in any event, no, we're cognizant of security is important depending on the environment. I mean, there's places for absolutely everything. Just there's balanced use.
There's all these questions going through my head because I'm limited. I know I have limited time, and I want to make sure we cover as much as possible. You tweeted out, and this is just a very small thing, but I'm curious about the difference between USB-C and Thunderbolt 3, because a lot of people think it's the same kind of connection, and it's really not. It's completely different, and the speeds are different, right?
It was surprising to me that, because we got so close, it's not surprising now, but it was first brought to me that, when you ask somebody if they have an SSD or a hard drive, that they'll say yes to both questions and not realize that they're, two different types of technology. That, the SSD is super fast and a hard drive that's yesterday in terms of speed, certainly in a boot drive. But Type-C and Thunderbolt 3, Intel made a huge mistake, in my humble opinion, of marketing. Initially doing marketing of Thunderbolt 3 is the USB-C that does everything. And today, a lot of people, even some folks that are top in terms of the IT space, how they make everything go, but they're buying from the right places because they're buying from us. But one of these guys came to me and said, "Wow, hey, those 10G USB-C adapters, I think that you got us. Awesome, they're working perfect." They had to replace some old Thunderbolt 2. They were trying to adapt with an Apple adapter that wasn't working. It wasn't our stuff. But to the point, I said, my first response was, "What USB-C 10G adapters? We don't have a USB-C. I just got them last week." And
no, there's
that's
Thunderbolt 3.
So that's Thunderbolt 3. I said, what's Thunderbolt 3? What do you mean Thunderbolt 3? I thought USB-C and Thunderbolt 3 were the same thing. I said, no, gosh, thanks, Intel. But yeah, a lot of people, and that's a problem because you go on Amazon, everybody says Thunderbolt 3 compatible, and it's kind of like people consider it, is it Advil or is it ibuprofen? They're the same things. I mean, it's the same stuff in a different shell, and it's like, no, this is not generic versus real Thunderbolt. These are two different interfaces, two entirely different levels, two entirely different interface protocols for that matter. They happen to share the same connection, but no, they're different, and it's important to know. I mean, USB is still USB. Thunderbolt is still that heads and shoulders above. USB is an interface with overhead that effectively is attached on and is a go-between between the processor and your device. PCIe gives that direct path. Actually, Thunderbolt 3 is basically a PCIe lane, or PCIe lanes is like plugging a card inside your computer. Two very different things going on there.
So the argument about speed. Some people were saying the other day on a forum I was on that USB-C was faster than Thunderbolt 3. And I wanted to disagree, but I didn't want to create an argument. But that's not been my experience. Am I wrong or right?
No, you're 100% right. I mean, USB-C, it's 3.1 Gen 2 is currently the fastest implementation of USB over Type-C. I mean, that's limited to 10 gigabits. Thunderbolt 3 is 40 gigabits. Now, there's overhead in Thunderbolt 3 because part of that, it's not overhead. That's actually not, that's incorrect. Let me be more accurate there. There's allocation in that Thunderbolt 3 connection for display, but which, that's 12 gigabits of that is provided for supporting display. So you have 40 gigabits, enough to drive a 5K display, even an 8K display now. Plus, you've got plus you have the data side, and the data, 28 gigabits is available for data. So you're 2.8 now, or how you look at it, you have 2.8 times the bandwidth for data that you on Thunderbolt 3 than you have on USB-C. And USB-C has some display interface capabilities as well, but it's all sucked into that 10 gigabits. So there's no, from a performance point today, there is no comparison between USB 3.1 Gen 2 over Type-C and Thunderbolt 3. And then the next implementation of USB rather, we'll move that up to 20 gigabits, throughput for USB. But you're still effectively half the bandwidth of what you get on Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt does, Intel is accurate in saying it's the USB-C that does everything, because you can do, with Thunderbolt, you can have, the display going, all this data going. You can have the equivalent of multiple USB-C devices, through a single Thunderbolt chain versus, a single-ended USB product. But it's the confusion of people now thinking the USB-C is, Thunderbolt 3 and USB-C are interchangeable. Yeah, technically they're interchangeable from the point that if it's supposed to Thunderbolt 3, you can plug either kind of device into it. But yeah, Thunderbolt 3. Sorry to get so wordy on this, but people need to know if it's Thunderbolt, it's much faster potentially. Now there are cases where just because of the product, the interface is faster, but if you're connecting, something that's not going to take advantage of the interface, you're not getting the benefit of speed. But what you are getting is less overhead, lower latency, and ultimately a more reliable interface that's really plugging straight into your data, more responsive than what you get with USB. And some of it doesn't matter in the real world. Other things are definitely measurable and have an impact. Applications that people use, even if you get the same raw bandwidth benchmark out of something for just what the throughput might be, the real world on Thunderbolt typically exceeds, even where you don't hit you're not hitting the top, the ceiling of what the interface can do. You still get a benefit with Thunderbolt. And the other huge thing about Thunderbolt, everything that's Thunderbolt is certified. It does not get to ship as a Thunderbolt product unless both Apple, if you're Apple compatible, it has to be Apple. If you're just doing Windows, it's just Intel. But if you're marketing if you're offering your product in the Apple world, it's got to be both Intel and Apple certified and pass their testing, their lab testing, before it can be released and shipped into the market. Plus power devices, you have to be certified not just with the actual drive that's going to be inside of those devices, which is why, by the way, you cannot buy a Thunderbolt product that's bus powered, without a drive coming inside of it. But not only does the drive have to be certified that goes into it, we want to do a new firmware revision. We've done some adjustments. We've got a next rev. We may have done a year of testing qualification before we can update and start shipping with our new just a firmware revision. Of a drive that's inside one of these bus powered devices. A drive with a new firmware's got to go into certification. The experience on the Thunderbolt side is certified and guaranteed, for its consistency. If a new OS update comes out and causes a conflict with a Thunderbolt device, typically it's responsibility of Intel and or the manufacturer to make sure that whatever has come up gets fixed. Because once it's certified, it's in the I guess you could call it kind of in the book, in the log, and it's a product that's you pass certification, and it needs to be supported. If there's a firmware update issue, even the manufacturer, in case it can push an update, that will update Intel's chipset on that device to ensure that everything continues to flow and operate correctly. Things get delayed sometimes simply because there's going to be a major evolution that's important, for that product to work right and not be a bottleneck, not be something that's has to be accommodated, to the detriment of other devices down the road. So a current product might come out a little bit later to make sure that it's got all the right stuff, so that, again, that everybody in the entire ecosystem is all good. USB-C, USB in general, changes happen all the time. And we, we comply with certifications. We don't just throw chipsets in a box. When you buy a USB device from us, you can count on it being supported and being compatible and working the way it's supposed to work. But ultimately, in the world out there, a lot of USB stuff, it's very tough to count on USB in general, because there's no real regulation. Regulation is the wrong word, but there's no certification over it.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing out there that gives you any kind of assurance that, other than the brand that you trust and the experience you have and who you're working with, that you can count on just because it says it's USB-C, that you're going to get the experience with that device that's USB. With another device that's USB just because it's USB. But for the most part, on the Thunderbolt side, the actual, at least what the device is supposed to do from an interface point of view, that gets that there's a high level of certification. The thing that's not certified on things that bus power, what goes inside gets certified. There's heavy testing done by Intel. You pay Apple and Intel to effectively tell the world that, actually tell you and give you approval that yes, you can ship that configuration of your bus power solution to the world. On external products, that are powered by the AC, that's where we still have a significant differentiation. Because even though every Thunderbolt product, for the most part, it has passed certification. It doesn't mean that all base products are built equal, but the next level on top of that is what's put inside those solutions and how those are qualified, tested, and prepared. And the drives you put inside a solution, the cards you put inside a solution, the things you put in that don't have to be certified as part of the Thunderbolt device, that's another area of differentiation. And that helps. I shouldn't say helps. I mean, that's certainly an area where we also do things to be heads and shoulders above the competition.
I was wondering if I can ask you a quick question. Well, I was watching the dub, we call it. Everything is tied around Thunderbolt 3, and Thunderbolt 4 has already been announced. I was wondering what that's going to do on the back end for companies like Apple and companies like OWC that are going to have to change and bring in new products, or am I wrong about that? I just had a fleeting thought about that. Like all this millions of dollars in research and the back end that goes into putting out a product like this, and then if Thunderbolt comes out, well, it already has, isn't it, been announced? USB 4 has been announced. Thunderbolt 4 is still, is behind the scenes. There's always going to be things moving. I mean, when PCIe 4 comes out, Thunderbolt 4 will come out. We'll double from 40 gigabits to 80 gigabits. But we're forwards compatible. I mean, we're backwards and forwards compatible for the most part on these interfaces. So, yes, we'll be moving to a new chipset, but the fundamentals and design, fortunately, don't change. I mean, there's a lot from Thunderbolt 1 to Thunderbolt 2. There's some, I guess with each and every new step, I mean, it's to a certain degree, it becomes a little bit easier because we have the experience. And I mean, we've been doing this since the dawn of Thunderbolt. And actually, a funny thing, I love talking about it. When Thunderbolt was called Lightpeak before it even became Thunderbolt, it was actually one of the first demos that Intel released of the product. We actually smiled because we looked at the enclosure they put it in. It wasn't, it certainly wasn't our Lightpeak board, but it was. They used they retrofitted one of our chassis with their Lightpeak. I love it.
What we believe are some of the very first Thunderbolt demos. But at the end of the day, technology is always changing, and we just have to keep rolling with the change. But even when we went from Thunderbolt 2 to Thunderbolt 3, and it was stupid. We watched companies out there promising the Thunderbolt 3, we got Thunderbolt 3 or 40 gigabits for so much faster than Thunderbolt 2, and it'd be the same drive array with a Thunderbolt 3 interface design, and well, the drives didn't get any faster. 4 drives connected via Thunderbolt 2 really aren't any faster when they're connected via Thunderbolt 3 because the spinning drives are the limit. So when we get to Thunderbolt 4, certainly the fun there we'll be able to do more with SSDs. It takes a lot of hard drives to top out Thunderbolt 3 today. When Thunderbolt 4 is there, I mean, we're going to be even more of a flash world. And I'm excited for the solutions we'll be able to plug in externally when that technology comes to bear. It's really incredible what technology and every time it advances, people push it to the next level. I mean, video quality goes up. The demands on what you're going to capture when you're shooting video jump. I mean, in storage, fortunately, I do believe by and large it's kept up.
If you have time for one more question, you have a new Envoy that you're releasing, right? That just came out?
Yeah, we have our Envoy. We have our Pro EX for Thunderbolt 3, which that is absolute tops in performance across the board, and it's frankly it's unbelievably inexpensive for Thunderbolt. And now the next piece of that, we have a USB Type-C, a USB-C version, 10 gigabits. Coming out. That's actually I shouldn't say coming out. It's just now beginning to ship. That product is reliable. You can trust it. It's an OWC USB product, but it's up to about 1,000 megabytes a second. Actually, about 980 megs a second sustained. It'll plug in the Blackmagic camera, so it's that support the USB Type-C, which is slick for a lot of people. Plugs into anything with Thunderbolt 3 or USB Type-C. But extremely fast, up to 2 terabytes of quiet, rugged SSD that will fit in the palm of your hand, and on top of everything else, it's dust-proof, and it's also, safe for water is, I guess I don't know is the best way of putting it, but if you can, up to a meter of water for 30 minutes, it survives without any any issues. So an unexpected splash, or that monsoon you walked into, or prefer you dropped it in if it fell into some mode of water where you can recover it without reasonable difficulty. It's built to take the elements, and we're really excited about the product. It's amazing how much SSD, how much flash cost has come down, and how we've been able to maintain performance. And if I have two more, I do have a minute for this, and really want to go out there. Flash has come down hugely in price, but you got to be really, really careful. When you look at and you're comparing flash, one of the big drivers in price more recently has been the advent of quad layer flash, and the QLC product, as opposed to, and you see this with TLC. TLC is 3D has come a long, has come a long ways, and everything we build today now uses a combination of SLC and TLC. And I don't want to get overly technical, but there's a cheap flash there's the next generation, adds another layer, but the consequence of the additional layer, the price is extremely aggressive, but the performance is really poor and the durability is substantially reduced. Whereas this TLC stuff is, with the SLC, it's by design, we're here to maintain performance end to end on drives, keep things cranking. QLC typically is great for reads, but any kind of write load, number one, it doesn't have a lot of write durability for it. You can burn this flash out a lot quicker than previous generations. The other huge thing is, after a relatively small amount of writes, typically less than 1-2% of the drive capacity, you go from a drive that might be bursting at crazy speeds that they'll tout as their peak writes and peak reads, to speeds that can be slower than a hard drive. Now, any SSD, with rare exception, is going to be faster than a hard drive for high I/O operations, because a hard drive can drop to less than a megabyte per second when you really put a bunch of small high volume calls on. When you get the hard drives are typically today 500, 700 IOPS, whereas an SSD can handle 60, 70, over 100,000 depending upon the drive. So when you get the IOPS, don't really matter so much until you're dealing with small files, mainly, especially database-driven calls. But on these QLC drives, they'll maintain 100 megs a second. With IOPS, I'd say with high IOPS, with small file calls, if you're doing video, if you're doing audio, if you're doing things that are streaming data where you need to maintain a high actual pure data rate, you get that in burst, and then you actually can drop into a situation where those drives are, again, half, a third of the speed of some of today's hard drives. Again, if you're upgrading from a hard drive, you don't even notice the difference. But if you're doing something in the professional world, you very quickly realize why that drive was cheap. And you got to really look up. Sometimes you got to look beneath the hood, or again, whether it's hopefully it's OWC, but whomever it may be, just make sure you know the brand that you're buying and what they're selling, so you're not disappointed.
It's really hard. We don't know what's under the hood a lot of times, We're going on what we're told on the box, and a lot of us don't know what's under the hood. So you do have to be careful where you get it. Larry, I thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else we didn't cover that you might want to bring up?
No, I'm sure as soon as we sign this off, I'm sure there'll be 20 things. I go, darn it, go back, or I missed this, that, but I think we can do this. I'm sure we can do this again in a couple of weeks. But ultimately, we're professionals. We understand professionals, and it's we just want to see that everybody has whatever the solutions be, wherever they may be, whether we contribute or somebody else has already got a great solution. Just want to see creatives able to create and do so with as little effort as possible, other than the creative process, because that saps you enough. You don't need to be thinking. You don't want to be thinking hard about your hardware. You want the hardware just to be there, keeping up with you, if not staying ahead of you. And we're glad to be a part of that.
You're the foundation for everything we do. Thank you for that. And thanks for taking the time to do this. It's always nice talking with you. That was Larry O'Connor, the CEO and founder of Otherworld Computing, OWC. You can find out more. You want to tell us where people can go to learn more about your products?
Yeah, you can learn about everything in the Otherworld Computing universe at OWC.com.
OWC.com. And thank you so much, Larry. Appreciate it. We'll talk again very soon. And everybody listening, you know what I tell you. Get up off your chair and go do something wonderful today. Have a great day. This is Cirina Catania signing off.